And now it's time for our favorite part of the show. What's that say? Ads and sponsorship. Ugh, this is gonna be a real nightmare. Okay, what do you got for me? Patreon.com? What the hell is that? And they just give us money for it? Oh, if only we had that around in the 70s. Make sure you ask your mommies and daddies to send money to bestdarndiddly at patreon.com so they can drive a dump truck full of money up to our houses. Uh-oh, I said the loud part quiet and the quiet part loud.
Hello again, everyone. Welcome back to the Best Darn Diddly Review Show. This is a weekly podcast for anyone who loves The Simpsons or ever has loved The Simpsons, hosted by two dudes that grew up on The Simpsons. My name is Miles, better known as MrMostDaysOff, and today we have an awesome episode to talk about, Cape Feare, but we have an even more awesome guest joining us, and we're going to get to her in just a moment. But first, joining me as always, your co-host with the most, Richie the Whiz Kid. How you doing today, Rich?
Man, we get to talk about one of my favorite towns outside of Springfield in this episode, and I'm talking about Ice Creamville. No, Ice Creamville, man. I'm so excited. But we're not going to waste any time, like you said, so I just like to take the next 15 to 60 minutes to talk about a serious issue, and that is the mob mentality of North Haverbrook. It's a serious issue, and I think we need to talk about that. No, I'm just kidding. I'll go ahead and throw it back to you so we can get going. The man, the myth, the Mr. Thompson, it's Miles.
So today's guest is an incredible woman. She has worked for The Simpsons, or on The Simpsons now, for the last 20 years. She's won 4 Emmys as a writer and producer on the show, and something I'm very interested in, she also does voice direction, not only with the core cast, but with a lot of the celebrity guests that have come through the doors there as well. Welcome to Best Darn Diddly. Joining us today, Miss Carolyn Omine. How are you doing today, Carolyn?
I'm good, thank you. I'm great.
We are very, very thrilled to have you on the show today. First of all, just like we always start, just go ahead and tell everybody a little bit about yourself and your connection to The Simpsons.
Well, I'm originally from Hawaii, and I moved to Los Angeles to go to school. I did a lot of improv and sketch, and that got me interested in writing. And then I wrote some sitcoms. I wrote for a few sitcoms that you probably won't know because they were on for just a short amount of time. And then I was on Full House for a little bit. And I also, at that same time, would do, because Full House wasn't, it was a fun show. It was very nice people, and it was,
we've seen Danny stand up out of character, so I know that can't be entirely true, at least behind the scenes.
He's very nice. It's weird. It's Bob Saget. It's funny because when he was doing in Full House, we would have a thing you couldn't say screw, bag, nut, like in any purple sense, because he'd always be like, it was like Beavis and Butthead. He was always like, I know what you really mean. But yeah. So then I would also do just these animated Saturday morning shows. Some of them were really interesting, like Real Monsters and a thing called the Wild Thornberrys. And that was fun because I had a friend who was running them, and they would let me, your first draft would get on the air, which was not what was happening.
Because we were just stupid kids in the 90s. We didn't need any second takes, right? It was just whatever goes.
No, it actually was just the opposite. I think why TV has gone up quite a bit in quality is that, there was a time when they would have this sort of layer of executives. Every script had to go through them. And early morning animation didn't have that. And so it was written by the writers. And I think that The Simpsons and later a lot of the HBO stuff, but The Simpsons was such a jump in quality because they were asking Jim Brooks to come back and do TV. He just said, I'm not getting any notes. And so it is only written by the writers, which only makes sense because, you would have this staff of writers who had studied writing. They were very creative and it just took them a long time to get to where they were. And then there'd be somebody who just got promoted from accounting, and he would have notes, and he would be like, can there be a dog? And he would never been anything, and never had to, and that you'd have to do what that person said. And I think that was why there was this really bad period of time for TV at that point. But I think it's become a lot less, and shows, places like HBO and Showtime, and they started saying, look, you can cut it, the way they would lure people to, because cable doesn't pay as well as network, is to say, look, but the writers will decide what happens, and so I think that's a really big reason for the success of The Simpsons.
That makes a lot of sense. Before we move back to The Simpsons, though, I did want to talk about, you mentioned your improv that you did, and I know you were a member of the Groundlings for a while.
Yes.
I guess this does connect to The Simpsons, sorry, but one of our favorite voice actors of all time for the show was the late, great Phil Hartman. We know he was also a very pivotal part of the Groundlings there for a while, as were so many great, very funny people. But we noticed that you worked both on the ground, or you were part of the Groundlings and The Simpsons. Did you get a chance to work with Phil Hartman on either of those shows, or either of those projects?
I never did. In both cases, he predated me. I know a lot of the other people, just later knowing, just people who had worked with him. He had left the Groundlings before I got there, and it's so tragic. I don't even want to say, but like, I was actually hired, and then they were like, hold on for it was almost a month. They were like, we're not going to do anything for a month. And that was all because of the horrible tragedy there.
Oh, man.
So,
yeah. I knew when I was looking at the dates for both the Groundlings and The Simpsons, I know that it was very, very close, which is why I wanted to ask in terms of your time together on the show, or your time at the show separately, I should say. So, but yeah, just with the Groundlings, I know that was a big part of your early career there in California. But let's back up a little bit before that, because I had read that while you were living in Waikiki, you were part of a punk rock band. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Right.
Cover band, and we had to do sort of everything. We also, because I wanted it to be punk because that was what was big at the time, but we also had to do, because we had to play for the military. That's where the money was. We also had to play, like, we had to do Freebird, because that's what everybody would ask for at the end of every night. We did Tom Petty and people that were just sort of big at that time. We also did some Pat Bennett. We were a cover band.
Okay.
In Waikiki was great, and I was going to college then too, so I was going to the University of Hawaii. But also, we would play at Pearl Harbor, and there'd be these boatfuls of sailors that would come back, and it was really a wonderful experience because they so wanted to see a rock band or like whoever. And they were willing to pretend that they were, so it was this giant crowd, and, like they would be reaching their hands up, and I'd like to touch your hand. Like we all wanted to pretend that we were actual successful musicians, and they wanted to pretend that we were too. And it was a really fun time.
Well, hey, if you've got the crowd support, then it sounds like you were pretty over to me.
Yeah, it was great. It was a really fun experience.
Cool. Yeah. So what was it that was the driving factor that made you go from Hawaii to LA?
I knew I wanted to work somehow in the entertainment industry. I first thought I wanted to be an actress or to sing. But so I knew I wanted to be in LA, and I was also studying art and design, because I just thought that would be a good backup. And so I went to UCLA and immediately started doing improv, which was my first exposure to it. And I thought, oh, this is so much fun. It was like, when I was a kid, that was the way I would want to play. I wasn't a big sports person, or I always wanted to, like, basically, let's think of a premise and then let's just act this out. And that, so to find this thing where there were grown-ups or, sort of grown-ups, college kids doing it. It was a lot of fun. And that really led me to a lot of things. I think that an improv background is probably one of the most important things in working in a room the way we do comedy, because we are basically group writing a lot of the time. And most of the time, that's what you're doing. I mean, not everybody has an improv background, but some people just have a outgoing personality. But for me, it was really helpful.
Yeah, I can see where the two correlate a little bit together. We read an interview where you were talking about the writer's room and how you guys pitch an idea and then bounce off each other. So I can see where the improv aspect kicks in. And I never would have thought of that before, but that's a great point.
Yeah.
I really appreciated that you mentioned in that article you just referenced how as writers, you guys will spend the first part of your day specifically not talking about work, not talking about The Simpsons in this case, to try to get the creative juices flowing. So now when my wife is griping at me that I'm just watching endless YouTube videos, I'll be like, no, honey, I'm just getting my brain in the right place so that I can try to be funny.
Yeah. I always call it marinating.
Ooh, there you go. I like that. I like that a lot.
That sounds a lot better. But I wanted to ask you, you mentioned that you worked on All Real Monsters, and the last Simpsons writer we had on the show also referenced that show as a starting point. And so did you guys cross paths?
Is that Michael Price?
Yes.
Again, it's so funny how it's because we know a lot of the same people, but we don't know them at the same time. I love Michael. But yeah, we didn't cross paths then, but we cross paths all the time now. It's very strange. There's always that strange thing where because like I know Steve Mazer and Mark always go off to see training camp for baseball, and then Mike was doing it, and I was like, oh wait, because I used to be in the improv group with those guys, and I remember they would always leave to go do that, and now it's weird because now Michael's leaving to do it.
That's awesome. It's funny when we look at the IMDb pages for you guys. If you look throughout your work, a lot of you guys, the Simpsons staff in general, there's a lot of actual crossover throughout your career. So it's kind of interesting. Just I guess I don't know how the process works entirely, but it seems like there's just a lot of you guys writing scripts for various shows as you're kind of working your way to the Simpsons, which I imagine for a writer has to be somewhat of the Holy Land, so to speak.
For me, yeah, that was definitely what I thought. And I think that, maybe it's changed now, but I think there are a lot of people about that. Yeah, generally you write freelance episodes and then you get on staff someplace, and then, because that's really, until you get on staff and people can see what you're like in the room, it's hard for anybody to know, because that's 90% of our job. On The Simpsons, we each get one episode. Sometimes you get another, just because if it works out, but with the amount of us, there's about 18 of us at one time usually, and there's 22 episodes, so everybody gets one episode, and then sometimes you get two, like a couple of us will get two, but we also give out every year. It's a WGA, the Writers Guild rule that we give away 2 episodes to freelance writers. It's just so they ask all shows to do that. It's not one of those. It's not a rule that, like, I know some shows that just refuse, and I don't think anything ever happened to them, but it's just a way to give people who aren't on staff a chance. So with 22 episodes, 2 of them going to outside writers, we each usually get 1 episode a year where we go home and, after talking it out with the group and pitching out the story, and we have a pretty good idea of what the story is, then we go and write a first draft, and then we bring it back in, and then we start rewriting it. So other than that 2 weeks, the rest of the time is being in the room, because we rewrite the scripts. We have a table read, and then we rewrite it. Then we have an animatic, which is like a pencil drawing, early animation. We rewrite it. Then we write it after color. And then every once in a while, we're even, very close to air. We'll go, oh, there's a little hole here. We'll, take a group off and come up with, and that after color, it gets really difficult to, we can only reanimate so much because time and money.
Probably expense. Yeah, I'd imagine.
Yeah. It's expense is a lot of it, but also sometimes can't get it done in time. Although we're getting really fast at it. But I mean, the animators are getting really fast. Some of those political video things that we've done, kind of cranked out really quickly.
Well, I mean, just it's only a still or a very minimal motion, but just with the debut of season 29 a week or so, by the time this airs, it'll be several weeks ago, but you guys had added in the support for Puerto Rico, little Simpsons theme thing that you guys did, which was really, really cool. Something, you know, that at least you guys are doing something. Yeah, that just the fact that you were able to be so topical on point. And again, that wasn't necessarily full animation. There was limited motion in that, but it shows that there's got to be a pretty quick turnaround to be able to get something like that into the last shot of the show within just a couple of weeks.
There are technologies that exist now that make some things faster. I don't even know, was that animated at all?
I believe that Bart was waving a flag, and I want to say Lisa also may have. I mean, maybe it was my mind that was making things animated, Carolyn. I'm not certain, but in my memory, I definitely remember a little bit of movement.
Yeah, they can do a little bit really fast, and I'm not even sure. I can't really speak to what exactly they're doing, because we had that episode. I don't know if you remember a couple of years ago. I want to say year before last, where we actually had Homer
live. Yeah.
And that was, I felt like it was hard to know how extraordinary that was, because Dan Castellaneta, who is incredibly wonderful and just, he's brilliant and a really good improviser. He's an amazing improviser. But one thing that he really has a thing about, he doesn't like to be shown doing Homer, and I've heard various reasons why he doesn't like it, but he's occasionally done it. I can think of like one time on like a Howie Mandel show he did it, but for the most part he doesn't like to, and I felt like that would have really helped if we could have had him in the corner, you know, like
a picture-in-picture type of thing. Yeah.
It just, to me, it worked so well that I was wondering if, like, people at home, it just looked like, you know, Homer being animated. And it's like, no.
I don't know that people appreciated that this was happening in the moment.
Yeah. As that guy is talking, this is happening. And it was like, there was, you know, a sort of set background. And it's this Microsoft. I know we had all the Microsoft people there. Some sort of Microsoft technology. Dan was wearing some electrodes in places.
Cool.
And
that's crazy.
But there was also, so that was mainly the lip flap and some of the facial expressions. But Homer's arms and stuff, there was sort of a menu of gestures, because off to the side, David Silverman, who is one of our supervising animation directors, he was making almost like a puppeteer, making the arms move, and Dan was talking and head movements and mouth movements. It was pretty crazy.
I remember just the buzz that week on Twitter and just all over the internet was huge, and it was, I think it lasted like 30 seconds, and I can't even imagine how much incredible amount of work had to go into that 30 seconds, but I think, if nothing else, it was a good week's worth of just solid internet buzz, and it actually, you know, gets the Simpsons trending, which is always good.
Yeah, you know, it's funny because I was screening calls, and because there were a lot of things we had to sort of talk to people first and sort of set up the calls, because they had to agree to having their voices released and things like that. But everybody was so nervous because a lot of people hadn't done a lot of improv, and they were just so worried that like a call would get dropped or something would happen, and I just knew from my improv experience that like the best thing would have been if something little went wrong.
Sure.
Right. Yes.
You would be able to handle it, and it would be so thrilling, because I know like when we would, you know, when I did live action, you know, the audience would come in, and, you know, the actors would do it. They would love it when an actor would blow a line and then, oh, cut, we got to do it again. In fact, actors started, you kind of tell, like, when they weren't getting that much laughs, they would sort of like, I think, and nobody would ever admit to it, but I would think they would purposely blow the line and go, you know, hello, Dad, do up slap, whatever. Like, it's nuts because they love that, you know. But we actually, I felt like it went almost too smoothly, and it was such an incredible technology that it was hard to appreciate that what an amazing thing was happening. You know, it was this, but hopefully, you know, it was an interesting thing. But I don't know if they're using some of that to make things go faster. I don't really know. I know I was there when they were talking about doing the Puerto Rico thing, and then, but I wasn't that involved in the actual doing of it. But, yeah, we are able to get a lot of things done really quickly at the end. And sometimes we can put things in people's mouths, you know, like if they're not looking, or sometimes we can just take a line away and sort of write a line that looks similar to what they're saying, you know, so we can sometimes change things at the last minute. You
got to match it to the pre-existing mouth movements, essentially, or not show their mouth, whatever works in that regard.
Yeah, sometimes you can do, like, if somebody, you know, has their back to the camera, you can put something, you can make Bart say something, or sometimes we will go, okay, we need a line. It has to be funny. It has to have an ooh at the beginning or something.
That's awesome.
And we will, like, you know, we'll come up with things like that. Because sometimes things happen. I can't think of a good example, but, you know, well, I mean, I did this little magazine thing. And there's things that happened in the show, too, where it's like for Allure magazine, they're doing this thing with Marge. And just like her beauty products. And then there was this hairspray, and I had put down hurricane strength hold. And then all of a sudden we're like, oh, don't say hurricane. It's so, you know.
Yeah. Not a great timing on that one.
Yeah. So then we just changed, but there have been, and I can't think of an example right now, but there have been other times like that where we've said something and it's like, ooh, no, take that out. Cause it's, you know, we're not trying to make people sad.
Yeah,
you know?
We have that issue a little bit on the, I mean, we don't have the listeners or the watchers that you have to worry about offending, but we're so far pre-recorded a lot of times, since we do our show a few weeks in advance to give us time to edit and in case we need time off, things like that. So sometimes weeks go by, and in between when we recorded and when it actually airs, several things could have happened, especially in the volatile climate we're currently living in. You never know what's going to come out of somebody's mouth on you know, the news or whatever.
We're living in crazy times right now.
It's nuts.
It's hard to be funny, and I haven't felt that way in a long time.
There's a joke on this episode we'll be talking about shortly that has a Nazi reference, and how nice would it be to live in a world in 2017 where people would have to be like, well, that's a dated reference.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, you're talking about Allure magazine, and it just occurred to me, like, I've seen Marge and other Simpson characters in interviews and magazines before. Who writes all that? Do you guys do that as a group, or is it just you taking on the writing responsibility there?
We tend to, it's usually, those are little things that just sort of pop up, and often it'll just be like, why don't you do it? And then usually, sometimes one or two of us will go off and do it. I think that one, didn't have a lot of writing, and it was, you know, Marge's beauty product. So it was like coming up with beauty product jokes. So, and, actually I for a long time was the only woman on staff. I think I've been on staff 20 years. So Valentina was there, I would say, I think it was 5 years, but it would have to have been 4 or 6, just because we've gone to, maybe it was 6 years. And then, but just recently we've hired the brilliant Megan Amram, she's done been on Parks and Rec, and she's also in The Good Place, and
that's a great show.
I love both those shows.
Silicon Valley, you know, she's just
heck yeah.
Yeah, she's really great. So she had, I think it was like her second day, so it was like, I'll do the beauty product thing just because she'll get the next beauty product thing. Like, none of the guys had any idea of what anything was.
That's funny.
But yeah, those things are just they're sort of fun as a change of pace. But
so, Carolyn, this is very fat. We love hearing about all the behind the scenes stuff from the show, but what we really like to do here on Best Darn Diddly is we want to talk to Carolyn, the Simpsons fan. So I know that we talked a little bit, and you started watching all the way back on the Tracy Ullman shorts, which is a little bit before we didn't actually, we were both born in 85, so we were probably 7 or 8 when we first started watching the show, so somewhere in the second, third season, somewhere in there. But tell us about when you first discovered The Simpsons, what your reaction was to it, just what was your experience as a fan of The Simpsons when you first discovered the show?
Well, I was a huge Tracy Ullman fan, and I still am. And it's funny because I actually look back and I see those shorts and I think, wow, they're not that good. But at the time, thinking they were so brilliant. I was a fan of Matt Groening too. I just was sort of the right age to be in college to. There were a lot of comics like him that I didn't like. I would get the LA Weekly and the LA Reader. I did like his. There were some that would just make me so mad because they had so many words and it wasn't funny at the end. I'd be like, I read the whole thing. But
what a waste.
Yeah, get to the final panel. It's just like, oh, stuff just happened. Nothing was funny. But Life in Hell was always interesting. So I did like him. And I just was I remember looking forward to when it was like The Simpsons are going to be a series. It was like, oh, well, that's a great idea. And so I was on board right from the beginning. I waited for it to come out, and I was not disappointed, and I really liked the show. And then I started my first show that I was on, like Writers Guild show, was in 1990. So that was a couple years after the show had begun, and I just loved watching the I mean, I as a writer watching it and going, there's this one episode that everyone hates, the when Seymour is the Armin Tanzarian episode.
Yeah, we've been reading it. We talked a little bit about that on one of our recent podcasts. There's a YouTube video dedicated to how that was the day The Simpsons died, which I find interesting.
BS. That's BS. Yeah, like, that episode's awesome.
Yeah, we both have fond memories of that episode.
I know exactly what YouTube video that is too. That's so funny. That's like so full of like, he's talking as if he's teaching you this class. It's mostly opinion, and then there's a lot of wrong information. But I remember as a writer, I thought I loved that ending. I just loved that it was like, it was so, I don't know, it was just so irreverent. And I mean, I do know later, coming on the show, that it was on the cast, on the staff, it was very controversial. There were some people like Ken Keeler hated it, and there were people who like fought very, and I believe Ken Keeler might be the one who is the credited writer.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
I don't remember, but which happens. Sometimes there's something that you don't like, and but there were other things I just thought, like, they were so lucky that they got to do such interesting things, and the idea that they could just go and let's just not talk about this anymore, because there's always this thing when you write a spec or you write any episode for a series, it's always like, and at the end of the episode, put everything back where you took it off.
Got to have that Simpsons reset at the end, right?
Yeah, and that's always a sort of, it becomes kind of a, it makes it a little boring, because then it's like, what? You're gonna become a ballet dancer? And it's like, she's not gonna be a ballet dancer at the end of the episode. It was just sort of nice to like play around with somebody's backstory and just go, it's not anything like what you thought. And then we're not gonna mention it ever.
We have a rule on this show for Richie and I where we don't prejudge any episode until we actually get to it to officially review it. So a lot of the episodes we have not seen, and maybe, since we were in middle school even, or high school, some of them, honestly, there's probably a few episodes there that I haven't seen at all, just because you guys have been around for quite a while now.
Right.
And
a couple of years.
A few years, yeah. So
I think that Simpsons show might be okay in the future. Like, it might last a little while.
Right. But we're really excited to get to some of the, like the one you mentioned, and some of the other quote unquote controversial shows that you guys have done that, people have a very split or divisive opinion on, because we really just can't envision a world where The Simpsons gets as bad as some quote-unquote fans like to claim it is online, because every time we tune in, it's always hilarious.
Oh, well, that's very sweet. Yeah, I mean, I know I'm trying to think of other controversial ones, which there's some I have to admit I agree. I didn't like the episode, and then there's some where I just think, oh, that was so much fun. I do know there was a period of time where we were sort of like everything was like there was some kind of underlying conspiracy going on. We went through a conspiracy phase, but I think that when I look back at some of those episodes, I really really like them.
A lot of the people that say those things online too, we've noticed they always follow it up with, but I haven't watched the show in over 10 years. Yeah. So it bothers me that they're trying to complain about something when they haven't actually viewed it for themselves, because that's the day and age we live in, where you read somebody else's review of something that didn't pay enough attention and then use the same words as their own.
Right. Or they'll like come up with a reason why it happened, or they'll be like, well, that's because George Meyer and John Schwartzwelder weren't there. And it's like, no, they were there. That was their idea.
Even right now on the show Rick and Morty, which Richie and I both absolutely love. Are you a fan of that one at all?
Yes, I am.
So there's a controversy going on right now online because this third season was the first season that they have hired female writers for the show. And of course, the trolls online immediately, as soon as they go, oh, he doesn't have a penis. Clearly he can't write comedy, or she can't write comedy, excuse me. So there's now people that have even divided on Rick and Morty, which is clearly going very, very strong and still a very, very funny show. I know you guys just had Dan Hartman on the Simpsons, and we both love Dan, like all the way back to Community and, of course, Rick and Morty. So I think that anytime you give any reason whatsoever, be it a female writer or a change in the staff or anything, there's just going to be a group of people that want to pick it apart for whatever reason.
Well, when I joined the staff, the internet was still pretty young, but there were still some like bulletin boards about The Simpsons, and they were hating on us and they were hating on me. Like I hadn't even had an episode out yet, and they were like, oh, Carolyn Omine can use her bod to get the boys to help her write. I was like, oh my gosh. That they thought my body was that good, because I could definitely use a sit up or two. But
we can all do that.
I remember hearing John Vitti say that that the internet was very down on Cape Fear, this episode that we're going to watch, because they at that time thought, well, here this it's not as good as it used to be. Wow. They've been saying it from like the beginning, so.
The ironic part on that is Cape Fear is actually the last episode written by the original crew, because it was a holdover episode from season 4 along with Barbershop Quartet. And so the hate immediately starts for the new season, and all of the trolls essentially don't even realize, well, technically those episodes are still season 4 from Al and Mike, who everybody universally loves from what I can find online. They're often considered the greatest showrunners the show has ever had, and a lot of people's opinions go that way. So when you have people that are instantly hating on this episode just because it's something new and different, that's a telltale sign when it's actually, nope, sorry guys, this is still the original crew. So you're hating on what you love, essentially.
Yeah, I remember reading that one of this bulletin board early on, and it was when but just some theories that that were so wrong. Like there was at one point Brian Scully, who was Mike Scully's brother, was writing on the show, and somebody said, Brian Scully, I bet you that's the name Mike Scully uses when he's trying to, he's ashamed of his script, or he's trying to use a suit. Mike was like, do they really think that I couldn't come up with a better pseudonym than Brian Scully?
Wow.
And they used to think that Ian Maxstone Graham was a name we came up with when we were group writing, neither of which was true. And then there was this whole time when it was going to switch showrunners from Mike Scully, and they didn't know who was going to run the show. And they just went through the writing staff talking, and everybody joined in, and they all talked about, well, I don't know if John Schwartzwelder should be, I don't know if he's got the kind of temperament like as if they knew any of these people. And I was like, John Swartzwelder, like they were like, he's got to be the one. It's like, John Swartzwelder is not somebody that wants to be around other people. He's a great person, but he is a very interesting person that doesn't, he likes to live on his own.
He appreciates solitude. There's nothing wrong with that.
He would not be a showrunner type. He would not, I think, for all the money in the world, would not want to do it. But they were like talking about, it was crazy. It was just this interesting thing of people thinking that they know this cast of characters. I don't know what based on their names or, I guess based on the scripts. But, every script gets group written, so it's really hard to say. But I think that there are certain personalities that get assigned to. I don't even know what they base it on, but it's just one of those things.
So you had brought up the fact that as a writer, you guys usually only get one episode per season, and that was actually something in the director's commentary that John Vitti had also talked about all the way back when this episode was going on, and he mentioned that the week that your episode is the one you're working on, essentially, is actually usually the worst week of the season, and it's way more fun to just be part of the group than it is to have it be your script that's getting picked apart. Would you agree with that sentiment, or would you have anything to add on that idea?
I think so. It is you with everybody else. You're just a suggester. The way it works is somebody runs a room. It's usually, if you're in Al's room, it'll be Al. And then if you're in another room, often be Matt Selman. But then if he's off doing something too, then it's just like, sometimes I run the room, sometimes, just any of us. So the only way writing works is it can't be a democracy. You have to have one person who is the decider, basically. So somebody has to run the room. So we'll go, okay, this joke has to be fixed. Okay, so it needs to be some funny way to say the car is broken, and so everybody pitches. Here, it could be this, it could be this, it could be this. And you could think to yourself, I like that joke, but you're not the decider this time. It's the person running the room. And it generally works out that way, the best, because it can't be like, well, who likes this joke? All in favor of, it has to be one person sort of leading and one person having a vision. And I do like to run the room, but it's not as fun as being just a joke pitcher. That
makes sense. With great power comes great responsibility, right?
Yeah, because you got to pay attention. There's got to be the one person who's sort of seeing the whole through line of like, okay, there's, we're all kind of aware of it, but like somebody else, there's one person who's, if you're running the room, you're going to be a little more hyper aware of like, well, we can't do that joke because that's very similar to something that just happened. Or we, the reason we're changing this joke is we want him to not seem so mean. So we don't want to do that mean joke you just pitched. There has to be one person who has the criteria in mind. And then the other people are just trying to come up with funny stuff. So, and when it's your script, you have this, it just means a lot more to you. And it's hard because, you kind of got to let it go too, because it's not at a certain point, it's not your decision. So you have to just kind of
let it go.
Like God. Yeah. So
very cool.
Yeah.
Has there ever been a point where somebody pitched something that the room runner decided, yeah, we're putting that in, not realizing that it was something controversial that had happened in real life, and it actually got all the way like to the animation stage?
Things have gotten. I feel like that has happened, but I can't think of an example. I remember for me there was it actually was my first script, and in it they go to a leper colony, and I grew up. So for me, I grew up seeing like the leper colony on Molokai, and there was a time when they were going to kick them off, and they, came out and protested. So in my mind, they were very real.
Right.
She was a part of my experience. And there was a point when I think the guys were making these jokes about, it was like, it's kind of, you get kind of crazy, and they were just making these leper jokes. And I was so new, and I was like, oh no. And it was like, I actually had to kind of go quietly over to Mike and go, I don't want these leopard jokes. Sad.
Literally hitting too close to home.
Yeah, it was like, I just felt like, I think that just for most people, I think most people think of leprosy as this kind of dead disease that doesn't really, it's like a thing from the Bible almost,
Honestly, that's where my mind goes. It's like a biblical word that, makes about as much sense as like Nazareth, what's that?
And, really it's only, because it was cured in the 70s. And so, they're on Molokai, and I don't even know if any of those guys watched the show. There's like maybe, I think there might be a few, there are a few left, and at the time of the show, I know there was about 15. So it really was, there might be more. I know Mother Teresa worked with lepers, so there probably are some others. But for me personally, there were 15 people that I thought, oh God, they've been through so much already. Let's not
kick them while they're down. Yeah.
And that was the only time I ever think, like, I thought for myself, oh, oops. And I understood. It just seemed like it was like just making fun of something that seemed like a long time ago. But, for me personally, I thought of it as something a little more recent. So.
Well, especially when you're like, hey guys, this is the first episode I helped write, and then they watch it and see those jokes.
Yeah. Because it was also the first episode that was in Hawaii. So like I knew that Hawaii was going to, like, there was like a newspaper article, like, it's coming to Hawaii. So I knew people would be watching, and I just pictured these like in their 90s, these people who had like been thrown onto a leper colony, but they're still surviving. And I'm like, let's watch some TV and take right off our problems.
So speaking of watching TV, we all got the opportunity to watch this amazing episode, Cape Fear. It is the highest rated episode from season 5, a 9.1 out of 10 on IMDb.
But everybody hated it.
Yeah, the one that everybody hated, of course.
Yeah, where they jumped the shark.
So this episode debuted all the way back in October 7th of 1993. The chalk gag on this one was the cafeteria deep fryer is not a toy. And you can tell this is a leftover from season 4 because Mike Reese and Al Jean love to talk about how they use the crap out of that extended circus couch gag to fill in just a little bit of time whenever their episodes are running short.
I think this episode, and I think it's what helps this episode a lot. The fact that this episode was short was kind of a running theme for this. It was like from the right from the beginning, it was short. And so there are a lot of jokes in this that, it's actually what we hope to do. Our episodes have actually gotten shorter. Fox has, slowly chipped away at the actual time. But it's so good to do a story. Like, it doesn't do the thing where it doesn't have the first act that's completely different. I don't think it does. It doesn't really have a B story. It's just one story. So there's not a lot of kind of housekeeping to, sometimes you have to have all these things to explain the story. The story is very, very simple. And so you have all this room for these really long jokes. And there were many cases throughout this episode where it's actually kind of padding, but with that writing staff, the padding is always really good. It's always these really nice jokes that can take their time. I think it really actually benefits from being short.
It seems like it's a recipe to let creative people have an opportunity to be creative, as opposed to having to stick so close to the track that the show essentially is on for a plotline purpose.
Yeah, there's usually so much stuff you have to say and explain to, like, this is very easy.
Well, and to your point, this one also starts out with a TV gag, which I know Michael Price had alluded to us or shared with us that is another telltale sign that they were probably running a little bit short, because they're really easy to add these little TV gags and then just transition to the Simpsons family watching whatever jokes you put up there on their home television. In this case, it was the Nazi soldier I was talking about earlier announcing the McBain show.
Did you notice he had the same last name as Rainier?
Oh no, I did not.
Yeah, he was like a Baron von Wolfcastle, or with his actual name in there.
I didn't even notice that. I noticed that there was like all these curtains that opened too, and I just thought, okay, that's a body right there. Like it's like he said, how many? Like add 3 more curtains. You know?
As I mentioned, the Simpsons kids were actually watching this whole thing go down, and McBain is just terrible on this. He's making fun of, he's trying to have banter with his musician. He's like, oh, that jacket makes you look like a homosexual. And then when everybody boos, oh, maybe all of you are homosexuals too.
Wasn't it a reference to Arnold Schwarzenegger? Like, didn't he do that at some point in time? I thought he had a statement like that back. Maybe he did it after. Maybe he took it from Wolfcast.
Simpsons did it?
I swear that I thought they were making fun of that instance.
I did not read that. I just took this as one of our beloved jokes that The Simpsons often takes at the Fox network, because immediately Bart comments how horrible that was, and Lisa even says, the Fox network has sunk to an even new low, which I love that you guys always get away with taking jabs at Fox.
We usually do. There was one time we didn't get away with it. There have been a couple times we did get away. There was one time we actually, where Marge actually told the audience to, change the channel right now. To, no! And we had to change that part.
Yeah, those ad dollars.
Yeah, I also think it's a reference to Arsenio Hall. I think that, I've heard Al say, it was, this sort of awkward, chemistry between him and the band. But I think Arnold Schwarzenegger, he was sort of known to say things like, you're a soft, girly dad.
Yeah.
Like that. Actually, Donna Carey, who also wrote for our show, he lived in the Hollywood, near the Hollywood sign, and at one point he actually saw Arnold jogging with his daughters, and he said he heard him say, "Run! Why are you so slow?"
I wish we said, "Get to the chopper."
Wow. I really like the bit how this whole thing gets started. The whole catalyst of this episode starts with the mail right at the beginning. Marge brings in the mail to the kids. Lisa actually gets a letter from her pen pal Anya. Dear Lisa, as I write this, I'm very sad. Our president has been overthrown and
replaced by the benevolent General Kroll. All hail Kroll and his gloriousness regime. Sincerely, little girl.
That's so brilliant. That's one, again, another example of how this episode benefits from being short, because it's this is not even the letter that's important, but they take time to do this thing. And I love these jokes, and this is me being a fan where I don't really know who wrote the joke, but it seems like that's the kind of joke that George Meyer wrote. Well, this is John Beatty show. It probably is. They all do, but I love jokes like that have, there's so much unsaid, but you get this history of what's happening there. It's really funny.
There's still the thunder for a few brief moments. You don't really remember it later on, but every time you see it, you're like, oh yeah, I love this part.
Yes, exactly.
And George Meyer, you're not the first to call him out as being just a great writer. And in fact, I know you actually did an interview, which I loved reading. It was with Nancy Cartwright, the voice of Bart Simpson, of course, and many, many others. But Nancy actually interviewed you back in 2007, and you even mentioned how much you appreciated George Meyer back then. And also Michael Price specifically brought him up when we reviewed the episode Homer the Heretic, which was my favorite episode from season 4, and another one that George Meyer also wrote.
Yeah, he just was very, everybody has really interesting points of view, but he has a really great, inspired sense of humor.
Well, the letter that actually got this episode started was to Bart. All it said was, "I'm going to kill you," and it seemed like it was written in blood. And we actually get this great swipe to the Springfield Penitentiary, where we do in fact see somebody writing with a bloody finger, "Die, Bart, die." And also on their to-do list, same as well, and also in blood, "Threaten Bart, do laundry, Buy corn holders.
Yeah, I was his to-do list. I love that. And he's checking them off too in blood, right?
Yeah. I really like the way the animation looks when it first cut to Bob's hand, where like his hand was in clear sight, but it was blurry in the background. For some reason, it just added depth to me, and it just looked very real. And I don't know why it caught my eye every time I watched it.
It's a really cinematic effect. They call it rack focus, where you're like, you're. It's almost like the iPhone's portrait mode, where everything's blurred in the background.
So Simpsons did that too.
Yes.
Predicted portrait mode.
I also really love their watching a Itchy and Scratchy episode, and Bart is actually very noticeably uncomfortable. Another great job with the animation there with his facial expressions. But the Itchy and Scratchy show itself was Spay Anything, and it's a great, great parody of James Bond's Goldfinger.
Right.
Really, really great bit with the laser going up towards the tied down Scratchy, and he's able to escape with his tongue, but it's to no avail because the mouse gets him yet again.
Yeah, I love that as a very effective music too, where it's kind of got like the really, really tense music when he's like, and wonderfully animated tongue, and then it unplugs the plug, and then it's like, it gets really chipper, and then when Itchy comes in and just plugs it back in, it does, you think it would go back to the, tension music, but it just turns into like like that.
And then this is all interrupted. Again, Lisa was having a great time with this episode. Bart, noticeably shaken, can't even enjoy his favorite cartoon. This is all interrupted when we hear Homer scream from the other room, "Oh my God, somebody's trying to kill me!" Oh wait, it's for you, Bart.
One thing I'm going to point out also, I love when Lisa acts like a little girl, because she doesn't always, but one time she always does is I love that Lisa, because, sometimes she can be a little, her character is sort of the killjoy, and it shouldn't be. We always have to sort of fight against it. So I love when, she kind of, her character kind of digs this violent, inappropriate cartoon. But the Homer thing, I was thinking about that when we watched it. Sometimes we do respond to a lot of fan criticism, and I feel like sometimes right now that's one thing where people go like, Homer was such a, like, there's that phrase that jerk ass Homer, whatever. I think that, yeah, we should be careful, but I also just think Homer he's so lovable and likable that he can do some really amazingly bad things, because there's something so, sweet about him. And that, I feel like that's the thing, like I look at that, I go, we would probably not do that now, because we'd be afraid of the criticism of jerk ass Homer. We would not have Homer go, oh, it's you. Oh, like, it's just Bart being killed. It's not me, but it's such a funny joke.
Somehow you guys always do such a great job that you protect Homer in a way, because he'll do these incredibly selfish things, but in a weird way, it's not with any sort of malice or bad intent. It's just that he's just so self-centered and selfish that he just honestly doesn't even really realize that the effect, oh, good, it doesn't affect me, and it doesn't even cross his mind that that's going to be bad for his son. And that's a theme that we'll see a couple times just in this one episode, let alone the rest of the series.
Yeah, you don't, I feel like you don't think of Homer as, even when he says selfish and bad things, you don't think of him as like a selfish, bad person. I remember Schwartzwelder used to say that Homer, like the baseline would be that Homer is exactly as smart as a dog. So, and I always thought that was perfect, because it's like, he's not that smart, but he's very likable and lovable. And, if your dog chews up your best pair of shoes, you don't go, why did you do that? That was so evil of you. You just go, that's what you do, and
unless the dog has shifty eyes.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah, he's been plotting.
I think I read that in the same interview that we were just referencing earlier with Nancy, where you mentioned the line that he told you that you never want to write Homer dumber than a dog, which as soon as I read that, I was like, oh my gosh, that like just brought up so many instances in my mind where you're thinking that's such a great rule. And it made me think, you guys need to have an episode where Homer and Santa's little helper switch brains. That'll prove that point.
Yeah. It's weird. It's interesting because, like, you know, dumb is always funny, but like Ralph is a very specific kind of dumb too. It's like Ralph lines are like haikus. They're very. It's kind of hard to hit that note right. It's just, and they're very, you know, he has like one line. But Homer is just this magical, wonderful character. But yes, I loved. There's a couple of times in this episode where he is not helpful.
Well, immediately after they get this letter with the die Bart die, they go to the kitchen where they've actually now laid out all of the threatening messages they've seen, and they all happen to be in that same bloody handwriting, except for one. This one's in different handwriting. Homer replies, oh, I wrote that one after Bart somehow put this tattoo on my butt, and he pulls down his pants to reveal wide load written across his ass.
And everyone like,
even Nelson shows up for a ha-ha.
Yeah, and Marge is like, oh, that's so funny.
The whole family was laughing. Even Grandpa was laughing at him, which you didn't even see a second ago.
Well, Bart just wants to know who would want to hurt me. I'm this century's Dennis the Menace, which is so perfect. That's dead on accurate. But I love how Abe Simpson here, he sometimes gets these brilliant little moments where you find the right balance between just completely senile and still holding on to very, very funny, because he suggests that they get Matlock to take the case, and when the kids remind him that Matlock's not real, he says, neither are my teeth, but I can still eat corn on the cob if someone cuts it off and smushes it into a fine paste. Now that's good eating.
Corn jokes in a matter of minutes here with the corn holders from a second.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Somebody probably had corn for lunch, I'm guessing.
It does. The lunch is very, it has a lot of impact on the episode. No, yeah, I love Grandpa. He's so great to watch Dan go between Grandpa and Homer, and it's just like he really does. Our cast really does just embody these characters, and that's a big reason why they're so brilliantly funny, because they're so real. But yeah, this is a good example of Grandpa still staying. You know, he wanders off the path, but it's not too bad.
He gets pretty far out in this episode, actually, especially when we get around to the end.
I think he stays in character. We'll get there, but I think he stays in character for a reason.
It's interesting. It's a fun joke. Even the director's commentary, which was on this episode, it was Matt Groening, John Vitti, and Al Jean, like I mentioned, and they said they were like, "Yeah, I'm not even sure watching this one back if we didn't go a little bit too silly and too extreme at the end of this one."
Yeah. Well, you gotta have fun,
right? You made it sound from that article. You make it sound like it's a blast writing for the show. So it's a blast watching it. So I would hope that it's a blast making it too.
Oh, I'm glad. It is a blast. It's very fun.
So everyone in Springfield seems to be having a blast too, except for Bart, who is really still very shaken by these death threats. Nobody else seems to be really bothered by him, but Bart is actually trembling under the jungle gym for protection, and he has Milhouse patrolling the schoolyard trying to figure out who might be threatening him.
Yeah, good intel. Milhouse, not usually that efficient, but he got some good intel, like really accurate intel about what the kids are thinking.
Yeah, the girls are going to call him fatty, fatty, fat, fat, and Nelson's planning to pull down his pants. But hey, the good news is no one's planning to kill you.
Oh, right.
And just as Bart acknowledges it, Nelson pulls down his pants, and all the girls show up and start chanting and pointing and laughing. So it's a pretty rough, good moment for Bart.
Yeah, I guess it's better than not being killed, but he's not even that fat. But
A little extra pudge for a 10-year-old is pretty normal. He's probably just growing, right?
Yeah.
Maybe he could use a couple Sideshow Bob stabs.
They know, they've glimpsed his future. Like, they've all seen his dad, but
The misery continues for Bart the next morning when his alarm goes off at 7 a.m.
All right, this is dedicated to Bart Simpson with the message, I am coming to kill you, slowly and painfully. Wipeout!
Dun, 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 dun.
I really wanted to do that, I'm sorry.
The DJ is super, super happy about this. Like, he is so thrilled to announce that this guy is going to come kill somebody slowly and painfully. It's in zero hesitation in his happy-go-lucky morning DJ voice.
Good boys from ABPL, come on now.
And that leads into a series of short scenes of misdirection, or I was going to ask you, since you're a professional and I'm just an idiot, but would these qualify as mini red herrings going forward? These little sequences where they kind of try to allude that other people might be after Bart?
I believe that's the technical word for them, yeah.
There you go, yeah, right on.
And I think they are definitely little modular pieces that you can tell, again, it kind of smacks of a little bit of padding to me, but like, this is the kind of a thing where they probably, when we would come to something like this in an episode, you'd probably write 6 or 7 of them, and maybe even animate quite a few of them and then sort of cut out a couple of them. But it feels like they were able to not cut out that many because the episode was short. Because don't they have quite a few? There's like the Slander. Well, you'll have something.
Yeah, it's you're absolutely right. These were all actually added later due to time. They were short on time, so this entire sequence was added after the fact. It starts out with Marge. We see her cutting out the word "die," and it's in red, so it could be maybe the same message that we were getting. But turns out that it's just a coupon, and she says, "Bart, I'm going to get you some ice cream at the store since I'm saving so much money on Diet Cola."
I wish I could get that much off Diet Coke right now. Jeez, 75 cents off? That'd be great.
As a horror fan, my absolute favorite was Nettie Kruger.
Yes.
Because he's sitting over there with his Freddy Krueger glove and he says, "Say your prayers, Simpson, because the school can't make you like they should. Yeah. Maud, these new finger razors make trimming the hedges as much fun as sitting through church."
I love Flanders so much.
I also, like, as a player of Tapped Out, enjoy, I don't know if you play Tapped Out, but
I'm really angry, actually, because my entire account got deleted. Like, I lost everything. I'm actually quite heartbroken about it.
Oh, was it an accident, or was it some malfunction from the...
Something on the server end, and I've emailed them trying to get them to help me recover it, and I've gotten no help. It was really unfortunate because I had quite the little town going, and then I log in one day and the whole thing just starts over, and I was like, what happened?
Well, maybe we figure something out. But yes, no, I do love that.
People, Miles.
That's right, yeah, now I got connections. You can get me in touch with, isn't it EA that does that app for you guys?
Yes, I will see.
I can just start over. It is a game after all. If I'm not having fun, then it's really kind of pointless. But it was a painful experience I went through recently.
It's very painful. No, you absolutely should get it back. And I think there probably is a way to do it. I will see if we can figure it out. But, I do love there was that angelic hedge was a decoration that I particularly liked.
I bring this up every time we talk about Flanders now. When I was younger, like, Flanders would make me laugh, but he was kind of annoying all the time. But rewatching these episodes, I think he's my favorite character. It's either him or Mr. Burns, which is funny because they're voiced by the same actor. But I love Ned Flanders so much. He's so happy-go-lucky, and his lines are always so funny.
Yeah, Harry is brilliant, and Hurricane Nettie is
yes,
yeah, it's really good. No, Burns and Smithers too. That's another really interesting to watch. To watch Harry do Burns and Smithers, which he just live. He can go back and forth so quickly, and they're just such different people, and yeah, he really adds a lot to that. And they're fun to write. They're really great characters.
Since you brought up Mr. Burns, I was going to ask, actually, are you familiar with the play Mr. Burns, a post-electric play?
I am familiar with, like, I know what it is, and I think Al saw it, and he came and talked about it. Matt might have even seen it. Matt Groening might have seen it. But I haven't seen it. I know what it is. It's like it's post-nuclear, right? It's post-apocalypse, and it's that's how they're sort of entertaining each other by doing Simpsons scripts.
Yeah, I haven't seen it either, and I just read it due to discovering it through this episode, and actually our buddy Matthew Klickstein, he's an author who's been on the show a couple times now, turned me on to this play. The whole idea is, like you mentioned, it's a post-apocalyptic, post-nuclear power world, and a group of survivors are trying to entertain themselves by retelling an episode of The Simpsons, and it happens to be this episode that they're retelling. And through the retellings over and over again, as the play progresses, it moves further and further into the future. And essentially, kind of like a game of telephone, the details start to get mixed up a little bit. And by the end of the play, from what I understand, again, I haven't seen it, but possible spoiler alert, instead of battling Sideshow Bob, it's actually they're battling Mr. Burns on a flying ship, and Itchy and Scratchy are his minions. So it's this whole concept of how through the years of storytelling, details will get lost and change, and kind of throughout our history, obviously, there's instances of that as well, and history always goes to the side that wins type of thing. So it sounds like a very, very interesting story, a play that I would very much like to see.
That's interesting. I didn't realize that part of it. That it was one specific episode, and that it changes. That's a great idea.
Yeah,
it really is a very creative concept. It's something that I definitely hope either I'm able to travel to it or it travels to us at some time in the future.
Yeah, there was this. We always watch reference material all over. And for some reason we were watching the Munsters. We watched the Munsters movie.
I love the Munsters.
Yeah, and this is there was this one line reading by Grandpa, and it was like they're on a ship, and they go, well, what's wrong with him? Because then Herman is kind of seasick,
turning green.
Yeah, we all thought when he did it, he has this line where he goes, well, because he had talked earlier, I'm the mighty Viking, and I'm gonna, and then they're like, well, what's wrong with him? And then he goes, well, the mighty Viking is about to heave ho. People were like, oh my God, that's so funny. And then we kept doing it. We kept repeating it. And people would do it. And it was like this giant reading because we kept thinking it was this giant thing. And then one day somebody was like, what are you doing? Because we were after weeks of this, heave ho. And then they're like, what is it? Well, we'll show you. We looked it up and we watched it. It was such a subtle little reading. We're like, how did it get so big in our minds? It was watching him do it, even though in his vampire makeup, it was like, that's actually that's the way a normal person would talk.
But yeah, it makes sense. It grows in our minds and sticks out. That's absolutely the case with a lot of these things. I know things get misquoted through time. There's a whole a shout out to our friends over at the Secret Transmission podcast. They did a episode on the Mandela Effect, if you're familiar with that, where there's all these things that we remember being one way and they're very much not. And the conspiracy side of things, the silly side of things for the most part, is that there's actually a split in the dimension. And, those of you that remember, for instance, the Berenstein Bears instead of the Berenstain Bears are from a different dimension. So it's a silly concept, but it's actually a lot of fun to dive into because there's so many of these examples where people are so confident that they remember something a certain way, and then you go back and look and it's not the case.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of really famous quotes of lines are actually really wrong. I want to be alone is really, I think it actually is I want to be left alone or something. There's a few of them like that where,
Absolutely. Yeah, now I'm going to forget which one it is, but even Luke, I am your father from Star Wars, it's commonly misquoted as either I am your father or Luke, I am your father. I don't even remember which one's correct anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
Either way, Homer ruined it.
Yes.
Right, exactly. So, in addition to Marge and Ned, we also get a quick clip from Mrs. Krabappel, who we also very much love, and this is, "You're going to be my murder victim, Bart," in our school production of Lizzie Borden, starring Martin Prince as Lizzie. And even Martin jumps in, 3 whacks with a wet noodle, Bart.
Martin's all about that role, isn't he?
Yeah, he's into it.
Yeah, he sure is. Marge is finally starting to get concerned. For the entire episode, it seems like Bart's the only one that is worried, but finally Marge's motherly instincts kick in, and she goes to the police and reports that her son has been receiving threats. Though Wiggum is like, "I'm sorry, ma'am, threatening letters aren't against the law."
I'm pretty sure there is a law about that.
Oh, well, the day I take cop lessons from Mott Kettle.
Hey, she's right, Chief.
Well, shut my mouth. And it's illegal to put squirrels down your pants for the purposes of gambling? Better knock it off, boys. That has to be a time filler, right? I mean, it's hilarious, but that's just so random and out of nowhere. There's no way that that's a crucial part of the script, I'm thinking.
Yeah, I mean, it's even today, even when we have scripts that are tight and they don't have much room, Wiggum does tend to, like, there's certain people that just tend to expand no matter what, and he does.
Expand, that's a funny word.
I mean, his jokes are just, it's always, the conversations between him and Lou always get bigger, and I actually wanted to look up at when I saw that. I bet that is the law. I wonder if
You probably came across that and just had to include it in the show.
It's probably one of those random ones for a random state somewhere, yeah.
It's always those things like it's illegal to put a quarter in your ear in some places,
Got to keep the magicians out of town.
I thought one of the states had a law that's like in the middle of the country that you can't kill whales or something, and it's like a state that's not even by an ocean, I thought.
No killing whales in Tennessee. That's a big deal there.
You can't go to your SeaWorld.
But no, we have another instance of Bart here being the only person up until this point, like you said. Every time Sideshow Bob shows up, Bart's the only one that is worried for the whole episode. And that always bothered me as a young viewer watching this, where I was like, why won't anybody believe him? He's been right every single time, except once.
No, it's funny. That does bug me. And you know what that also bugs me? Because I was a big Harry Potter fan, too.
Me too.
So, like, reading the books, like, when you get to, like, book 5, and they're like, and Harry's like, "I'm telling you, my scar's hurting," and Hermione and Ron are looking at each other like, "Oh, boy.
Not this again."
Yeah, they're like, "But Harry, Voldemort is dead." I'm like, why don't you listen to him?
He's got a magical scar, and you live in a world of magic. That shouldn't be that damn complicated.
Every single time. It's been done. And they're always like, but he's locked away. There's no reason to be afraid.
Totally.
We were talking earlier that you and Miles briefly mentioned the episode The Whiz Kids, which was a direct parody of Harry Potter, if I remember. I rewatched that recently.
Yeah.
And I bet that one was a lot of fun to do as well.
It was a little frustrating because at the time it wasn't I remember Matt Selman and myself and a few other people had read the books. Even though it was a huge book for kids and for people who had kids, and we at that time neither of us had kids, we were just sort of nerds, and it was by then I think we were at book 4 around that time. I'm trying to exactly place the thing, but it was I think November, the first movie was going to come out, and so I just remember at one point because they had these moons and stars on the things. I was like, no, they don't look like that. They have to be these very specific robes, and I wanted it. I thought we were slightly ahead of the first movie, which I thought was going to be great because it would be like October, the Halloween would come out, and then the movie would come out. Although, I know that like kids were, it was already a huge thing.
Yeah, the books took the world by storm. I mean, before the movies even hit theaters.
Yeah, I can remember like trying to really argue, like, no, people know these books, even though they, but because at the time, I believe that the New York Times, they created a New York Times children's bestseller list only because if they didn't have a separate children's bestseller list, then Harry Potter was first, second, and third place.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so they had to like move it off to its own list. Other grown-ups could have. But yeah, no, it was really fun to do, but it was a little ahead of its time. I think we actually did another one later, but we did Angelica Button.
Yeah,
and that was, then it was we could kind of go to town on that. We're all sort of fantasy fans, and
well, that was pretty abundant in the premiere for season 29.
Yeah,
Simpsons.
Yes.
So we actually have a running gag on this podcast. We call it Magical Maggie, just instances where Maggie clearly must be a muggle-born witch because she shows all these inklings towards magical tendencies in a lot of the early episodes of the show, and even in the more current seasons. But I mean, going back to even like the Call of the Simpsons, where she's essentially got bears just taking care of her in the forest, and other instances where clearly there's got to be some sort of supernatural element to her character.
Right. I mean, well, yes, she seems to be incredibly smart, and she's very agile. Although I believe that there are instances of little infants being adopted by animals.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's. I don't know if bears were.
It does seem like a lot of animals have an inkling to understanding a young child. We talked about this recently with dogs, always knowing that when this baby's smacking them around, like they don't seem to care. They just let it happen. So that would make a lot of sense.
Yeah, some of them.
Yeah.
There's a story where it doesn't go so well, but there are some stories of like kids being. I remember there was a story about a kid being. But I think they were like monkeys. But I don't think he was a baby. But that a kid kind of got lost and had to live with animals.
That's funny, just because I've got two dogs, one of whom you can pretty much, he's just the most chill dog in the world, and the other one is kind of a little asshole, but I love him. But my nephews will just, they are obsessed. They just want to hug, but unfortunately when they hug, they tend to poke and, get eyes, and, we have to be very careful. But even Nash, my dog, who tends to have a shorter rope than others, he'll just sit there and take it when it's from a baby. And if if an adult person did that, he would have bitten like way before that. But yeah, it must be some sort of instinct.
Yeah, I think so. I do think though the dogs and cats, there's like they like babies, but then there's like this toddler age where they start. Then suddenly they act like. They'll like humans, but then they see this toddler and they get like, oh, what is that? Like, I think
to be fair, that's how I react to toddlers as well. They're little monsters.
Yeah, like people, they're like faster and grabbier, and
yeah, and they don't really have a concept of controlling themselves to some extent. Yeah, there's a lot going on there. But back at this episode here, we've got Lisa also coming to Bart's aid. Marge had stepped up and tried to go to the police. They weren't any help, so Lisa, the smartest Simpson, is going to try to save the day. She's obviously figured out who this has to be. Who has Bart been making irritating phone calls to for years?
Linda Lavin?
I'm sorry, somebody that actually deserves it. I had to look that joke up because I honestly didn't know who Linda Lavin is, but she was an actress who is mostly known for the sitcom Alice, and I think this was just a random jab. I'm thinking maybe you can shine some light on this, but this seems like the type of joke where they just needed to pull a name out of the air, and they probably had a few options, and they just landed on Linda Lavin.
Yes, there are times when we just kind of go for like it's. I think that it was just sort of a funny, sometimes a specific reference is funny and to say that she deserves it. She's sort of funny, but because you just would not think of her as being somebody who was, any sort of threat or any sort of
right.
So that's all that. There are times though, and I have, especially working in this town and living in this town. My son started going to school. I don't even want to mention who it was, but like there have been people that we made a joke like that, and my son ended up going to school with. They've never mentioned it, but I was just like, oh, I always just think like, oh, I hope you don't hear that one joke we made about you.
Or if they are, hopefully they're a fan enough to know. Because I mean, frankly, we would be just head over heels thrilled, like through the moon. I don't know even what the right term is, but our like life goal is to be made fun of on The Simpsons. So, hopefully that would be similar to whoever it was that you were throwing jabs at.
Yeah.
Way to tiptoe into that one, Miles.
Yeah. Hey, elbow, wink, wink.
Okay.
Where can I mail the check?
We'll say something horrible about you next time. No, I actually, when I was directing Simon Cowell, from
American Idol, right? The mean judge.
18 different shows has been on to do the same thing.
Yes, and it's sort of the same thing where he's super nice, which you don't expect because he's always so mean. And then I said, "Oh, do you want me to read Marge for you?" And he's like, "Yeah." And then he's like, "And what's your name, little girl?" And I went, "Maggie." And he goes, "That was terrible." And I was so thrilled. I was like, "Oh, I got a bad critique from Ashton Simon. I'm like an idol."
Lisa was actually referring to Mo, of course, who Bart has famously made many a prank call to, and this gag is absolutely insane and ridiculous, but I love these little bits with Mo. Mo immediately, when he's told, "Hey, we know what you're doing and you need to stop it. Hey, I'll take care of it. I'll take care of it." And he runs to the back of his bar where he, for whatever reason, unknown reason, he has pandas in boxes, and he has them all released into the streets of Springfield.
Yes, out of it. Yeah, I love these things with Mo where there's not, it's just it's such a rich story, but we're not going to tell it, and and then it's all like, what's he doing with them? Where'd they come from? And but it's also that his solution is just to let them go.
Out of sight, out of mind.
It's not the first time that he's going to be involved in animal trafficking either, because if you remember in that X-Files episode, he's got the whale, and Mulder and Scully see him when he's trying to get the whale out of town. Get it back to SeaWorld.
Yeah.
All right, everyone, we're going to have to cut this one right here. This conversation got just a little bit long, but how awesome is Carolyn Omine coming to the show, hanging out, and nerding out on The Simpsons with us? We had so much fun talking with her, and we have a lot more to say. The rest of this conversation and our review of Cape Fear will be next week. In the meantime, if you want to follow Carolyn online, you can follow her on Twitter. That's at Carolyn Omine. That's CarolynOmine. She's also on Instagram. Same thing, only OHMI. So Omine, if you will. We really cannot thank her enough for spending so much of her valuable time with us. You can follow our show on Twitter and Instagram. That's at BestDarnDiddly. Richie is at theWizKid23, and I am at MrMostDaysOff. Make sure to come back next week for more of our conversation with Carolyn Omine, and of course, the conclusion of the fan favorite episode, Cape Fear. Until next time, be cromulent to each other.
Testing. Can anyone hear me? My name is Toby, and I'm the host of the Secret Transmission Podcast. We are a show that discusses the paranormal, conspiracies, the supernatural, UFOs, cryptozoology, and anything else weird. Our show is transmitted to iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and YouTube. You can also follow us on Twitter for updates at Secret Transpod. So get ready to put on your tinfoil hats and come learn with us as we try to explain the unexplainable.